Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. I woke up this morning and I was determined that I was going to talk about what a good week it's been. Because it started off on Monday with the Supreme Court handing down an historic opinion. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of equality. The Supreme Court ruled that the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII, prohibited employers from discriminating against our LGBTQ family members and friends and neighbors and Americans. A ruling in favor of basic equality. It's a good start to the week. The trend continued because just yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Dreamers, in favor of the continuation of the DACA program, delayed action on childhood arrivals. The Supreme Court told the Trump administration, no, you can't kill the DACA program the way you tried to kill the DACA program. Why? Because the federal government created the DACA program and people, human beings, relied on it. And they made life decisions based on the fact that the DACA program was available. And then you, Trump administration, swooped in and tried to pull the rug out from under them without even considering how it would impact the Dreamers, the people who took advantage of the DACA program. And who were these people? Immigrant families who came to this country looking for a better way of life for themselves, for their children, and children who grew up knowing no other home than the United States of America. The Trump administration tried to kill that program in a way the Supreme Court said was arbitrary and capricious. Those are words that maybe we don't use in combination all that often, but it's a pretty strong indictment of the Trump administration. And basically it means you didn't even bother to look into how terminating the program would impact the Dreamers. And frankly, you didn't even care. Your decision was arbitrary and capricious, and you can't do it. At least not the way you're trying to do it. It was a very good day and a good week for diversity, for inclusivity, for common decency. It was also a week that saw real debate in Congress about the possibility of taking away at least some law enforcement tools that have allowed for systemic and systematic abuse and victimization of our African American brothers and sisters. It was a good week. And I woke up intending to talk about all of that in more detail. And then in walks in Mike Pompeo, and he locks horns with John Bolton in a credibility battle royale, and it's just too good to pass up. So let's recap. We know that Donald Trump wrongfully withheld money that Congress appropriated that was supposed to go to the Ukraine, and we know that Donald Trump withheld that money because he wanted President Zelensky of Ukraine to do him a favor, though, and dig up false dirt on Joe Biden. And we know it happened, and we know it was wrong because there was so much information and reporting, and it resulted in Donald Trump being impeached, although he wasn't convicted in the Senate trial. So we know this happened. So John Bolton, who was then the National Security Advisor, intimately involved in all this, writes a book, and he says, among other things, that he, together with Mike Pompeo and Secretary of Defense Esper, tried 8 to 10 times to get Donald Trump to release the aid to Ukraine, knowing that it was wrongfully being withheld. It was unlawfully being withheld. They tried 8 to 10 times to convince Donald Trump to release the aid. Bolton and Pompeo and Esper together tried to do that. And he wouldn't. Donald Trump's like, nope, not until I get my favor, though. I'm not giving up this congressional money. So enter Mike Pompeo, who says, oh, that's just nothing but lies, 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 lies by John Bolton. And in the last, 12 or 24 hours, Mike Pompeo weighs in with a tweet, right? And here's what he says. I've not read the book, John Bolton's book, but from the excerpts I've seen published, John Bolton is spreading a number of lies, fully spun half-truths, and outright falsehoods. So, Mike Pompeo tells us that we should believe him, Mike Pompeo, not John Bolton, when he says, look, we tried to get Trump to release the money 8 to 10 times, and he just wouldn't do it. So let's ask the question, who are you going to believe? Mike Pompeo, if you'll recall, was caught lying to the American people on national TV when he was asked by Martha Raddatz about that telephone conversation between Donald Trump and President Zelensky. Now keep in mind, Mike Pompeo was on that phone call. He heard every word uttered by Donald Trump. And yet let's look at the clip at how Mike Pompeo tried to look the American people in the eye and lie about that conversation. Let's watch the clip.
I want to turn to this whistleblower complaint, Mr. Secretary. The complaint involving the president and a phone call with a foreign leader to the director of National Intelligence Inspector General. That's where the complaint was lodged by the whistleblower. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that President Trump pressed the president of Ukraine 8 times to work with Rudy Giuliani to investigate Joe Biden's son. What do you know about those conversations?
So you just gave me a report about a IC whistleblower complaint, none of which I've seen.
Really? Pompeo says, well, you just gave me a report on IC whistleblower. I don't know. You were on the call, Mike. You know exactly what the president said. You knew exactly how wrong it was. You know, in days past, getting caught in a lie like that, where you're covering up presidential misconduct, would have gotten you fired, would have gotten you investigated, would have gotten you indicted, would have gotten you imprisoned. And yet Mike Pompeo is still Secretary of State. I'll tell you, that evidence that you just saw, ladies and gentlemen, that lie that he told to the American people is powerful evidence that he was complicit in Donald Trump's wrongdoing and complicit in the cover-up of Donald Trump's crimes. Would you trust Mike Pompeo to run a lemonade stand? And yet he is still the Secretary of State. Well, when it comes to a credibility battle between Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, I think we know where the smart money is riding. Of course, once John Bolton started to talk openly about Donald Trump's misconduct, not surprisingly, Donald Trump went off and started calling John Bolton all sorts of names. We've got a presidential tweet for that, right? Where Donald Trump said just recently via tweet, "Wacko John Bolton's exceedingly tedious, New York Times, book is made up of lies and false stories, said all good about me in print until the day I fired him. A disgruntled, boring fool who only wanted to go to war, never had a clue, was ostracized, and happily dumped. What a dope." Close quote. That's, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. You know, it's a common theme, right? Once somebody leaves the executive branch, once somebody leaves the Trump administration, and they start to speak openly about Donald Trump's idiocy, he starts calling them all kinds of names, right? He calls them dopes and fools and liars and whack jobs and nutcases. And it really does raise the question, if all of these people are dopes and nuts and liars and whack jobs. He's called General John Kelly that, former chief of staff. He's called General Jim Mattis that. He's called former DNI Dan Coates that, and former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson that, and now John Bolton, he's called all kinds of names, and lots of other folks. If Donald Trump is accurate about just how terrible these people are, who hired them to take jobs in the upper echelons of the executive branch? Donald Trump. What does that say about Donald Trump's judgment? That he's apparently, by his account, hiring nothing but fools and liars and whack jobs. Of course, these men aren't fools and liars and whack jobs and nutcases. You know, I think one of the most telling things I ever heard from a former Trump administration official came from General John Kelly after he left the White House, having served as chief of staff to Donald Trump. He was with the man day in and day out. He got to see how Donald Trump operated. And what he said in an interview was that if Donald Trump hires yes men, if left to his own devices, Donald Trump will be impeached. Let's take a look at that clip from John Kelly.
I never hesitated to tell you that, well, that other people were trying to manipulate whatever. But I said, whatever you do, and we were still in the process of trying to find someone to take my place, I said, whatever you do, don't hire a yes man, someone that's going to tell you, or it won't tell you the truth. Don't do that. Because if you do, I believe you'll be impeached.
If left to his own devices and decision making, Donald Trump would be impeached. John Kelly saw that Donald Trump's judgment was so poor, his decision-making abilities were so compromised, his inclinations were so self-centered, that left to his own devices, he would be impeached and he would deserve it. And of course, he has been impeached. And all that's left, folks, is for us to exercise our power to vote come November, such that when Donald Trump leaves office in January, the investigations can commence in earnest, because justice is coming. As always, folks, please stay safe, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.